Let's talk about maybe the best position on the team. Two of the biggest stars for sure. Let's talk defensive backs. Let's talk secondary. Locked on Badgers with Ryan and Rajeev.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Harings. That great man over there is Rajeev. Obviously, he runs the Bucky Report. We're here to talk defensive backs, but first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is hooking up all customers this summer with daily boosts or bonus. That's right. There's something for every single person every day all summer long. Go visit FanDuel.com to get started. And listen, because we don't get to do this as much anymore, we have to play
Badgers
it.
Winning a national title? Absolutely. Going on Final Four runs? Why not? It's Believe with Rajeev on today's Locked On Badgers.
Always a classic, my friend.
Love
Always
it.
a classic.
One of the first drops I ever had. One of the best, too, by the way.
And, you know, the next time you're on the Bucky Report, I've got one for you that I got totally remade, and it's really good.
I look forward to it. I wanted to make last week. I just couldn't do it. But, yeah, we'll definitely obviously hook that up.
Oh, yeah. The season's coming, man. We've got so much going on, like previewing. I love it. Like this, I'm excited for this show because now we're in preview mode. I'm all about recruiting. I love recruiting, but I love this time more. Like, I want to talk about what's coming, what we're about to watch in like 45 days. So, yeah, this is the fun stuff.
Listen, I agree with you. Recruiting's amazing. It's also kind of just like a placeholder until the season gets here.
Yeah.
Yes. And thank goodness it's there because what the heck? I mean, I almost just swore. What the heck else would we do over the summer if we weren't talking recruiting? But we are here to talk real football. Let's talk DBs. The first question, I sent you a bunch of questions over. We're combining this cornerbacks and safeties, talking about this entire positional group. First question I sent over, I want to start here. Who are the four cornerbacks that play the most this year? By the end of the year, who are the four guys that get the most snaps?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the first one's easy. We know Rico is, barring any injury, of course. Rico and Xavier Lucas, I feel like I think the first three are really good. So obviously Hallman and Rico, Forkerin, and Delancey. I feel like those three are kind of like locks. We know Rico's on one side, and I know Forkerin's going to be the starter. I think Delancey gets a lot of time in there too. I think he's going to be an active guy. And then of course Austin Brown. Are we looking at Austin Brown? He's like, I'm kind of thinking like nickelback for him. Are you kind of having him with your cornerbacks as well?
I actually had him as my safeties, but I definitely.
So that was kind of like because he kind of plays nickelback, so you kind of like. But let's go to safeties then. We'll put him with safeties. That actually makes more sense. So then like I feel like DeClona is probably going to be the guy that gets the most snaps after that because it falls off just a little bit after you kind of look at those top three. But I wouldn't expect really anyone else. I would like to see someone else in there, but I feel like DeClona is probably going to be the guy that gets it.
Yeah, your list mirrors mine, right? You have the obvious ones, and that fourth one is the only one that's a little iffy. It gets between DeClona. To me, it was DeClona, Lofi, or is a guy like Xavier Lucas by the end of the year stepping up? I think he can, but I don't think he's going to be there at the beginning. So when you look at the total number of snaps, I'm right there with you. I think it's those four. Max is the guy that was hardest for me to leave off that list because he made strides. He made it a big impression. They talked about him in spring. He really turned heads. I still think it's going to be DeClona. Right. I still think that's the guy.
Yeah. And what's hard for me to leave off the list is Amari Snowden because I want him to be on that list. I just feel like he's got physical tools that the other guys don't have. And I want so badly for him to just climb right up that depth chart, move into a number 2 slot. And he might. You never know. Like there's no nothing that says he can't do that. Not exactly what I would expect at this point, but I agree. Lofi's kind of the guy that you would think would be that next guy out, but I really, really want to see Snowden do something this year and show us that he can actually play at this level and play cornerback because I think he would be an amazing cornerback with those physical traits.
Yeah, you only want him there because you dream on the traits though, right?
Yes,
it's so tantalizing. I'm there with you though. Based on all the smoke, it doesn't sound like that's going to happen probably this year. Hopefully, still in the future. Let's talk safeties. 4 guys that are going to get the most reps. Like I actually think this one's pretty easy. I think it's you got Wohler, Austin Brown, Kamoy Latu. And then I think it's Preston Zachman. You get 4 veterans coming back. That feels pretty cut and dry. And I don't even know, outside of maybe a Braden Moore taking a big jump over the summer into fall camp, and he has physical skills, former 4-star guy. I don't think there's really a lot of suspense here in terms of what the 2 deep looks like.
It's not suspenseful at all. I think you're absolutely right. I think the question is if someone goes down, who's the next guy in? Because you're right, the 4 is kind of a lock. And I think Brademore would be that guy that would step in and kind of be that next man up in this situation. And yeah, I think that, and it's really a very secure position, right? I mean, when you got in Zachman is a guy that I feel like still doesn't get talked about a ton. I love Zachman. I think he's a really, really great player. And there's really 4 solid players at those 4 positions. Now, Latu, maybe we have some question marks. He didn't really play that great last year. But those are the 4 guys. And as long as there's no injuries, those are going to be the 4 easily.
Where does this group rank when we're looking at the secondary as a whole? Where does this group rank for you among all the positions on the team?
This is really tough. This is really tough. Like, so for me, I look at, linebackers. I look at offensive line. I look at running backs. I look at receiver. Like, there is a lot of positions where I'm really strong on. So I'm probably saying secondary is 3rd for me. And I think that offensive line, just everything that's happened this year, I just feel like that unit is looking really strong and looking really secure. And the linebackers, such improvement. Now, that one is hard to say, yep, that's a top position group, because we haven't seen it yet. And it's just on paper. So I'm going to probably say 3, but man, I really struggle with ranking these position groups right now. And I feel like I'm going to need to hear more and let's look at more at fall camp, because it's really a hit or miss situation there. There's a lot of units that could be really good and a lot of units that we just haven't really seen or unproven. I mean, the receivers look like they're good. The running backs, that situation is really good as well. But yeah, it's tough to pick it.
Can I make the argument why DBs should maybe be number 1, at least number 2? So
please do.
Who are the best 2 players on this team?
Yeah. You're right.
Is it Rico and Wohler? Did we just say the 2 deep on the safeties look great?
I wouldn't say the best. I would say they're the best 2 defenders. And I would probably, because I think you've got to look at a guy like Pauling, when you're looking at like best player on the team. But I think, you're right. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But you also look at the depth right now. We've talked about the safety depth, cornerback depth. Is Declona really up at that next level? If you look at the 2 deep, now I'm not saying the 2 deep at offensive line is necessarily better, because there's a lot of young guys on there. But I think on paper, the 2 deep at linebacker looks pretty solid. And I think from a receiver perspective, that's another one that's really hard to not be right at the top.
I feel like the receivers are still too many questions for me to put in. To me, it's Pauling, and then it's a bunch of, can Bryson Green step up? Can CJ step up? Can Vinny step up? Can Tretch be that guy? It feels like there's one guy we know for sure, and a bunch of guys we're hyped on. The secondary to me feels like there's more depth there than you would look at on the offensive line that's established. We looked at the 4 deep in the safety spot. The 2 biggest stars maybe on the team outside of Pauling are in the secondary. To me, so I go linebacker 1, even though you're totally right. We don't fully know. I just think the bodies they brought in and the depth and the returning guys and what we've heard and the athleticism, I got linebacker number 1. I got DBs number 2. And then I go offensive line, running back, receiver. I think in that order. That's good. I mean, we obviously have the top 3 the same kind of way. Because I O-line and linebacker for me there too. Yeah, I mean, you're right. You can make the argument either way. Offensive line, I mark, because the depth is a little bit iffy, right? But is he really going to be ready to take that spot over immediately if necessary? But yeah, linebackers, hard to pass up linebackers, man. I mean, they just look so good, dude. Dude, I can't wait. Let's end this segment on this one. I'm really interested to get your answer here. What is the most underrated storyline? And I'm going to start with mine. It's that the fact that all we've talked about really since this new coaching staff has come in is how they've attacked secondary recruiting, right? Bigger, taller athletes, longer guys. They've really flipped the script here. They've landed some studs. And yet when you look at the 2, it's mostly just Paul Chryst guys, right? It's the most underrated storyline here is Wohler, Rico, Kamoi Latu, Preston Zachman, Lofi. Like, this is really still a secondary of Paul Chryst guys, and nobody really talks about it because we keep talking about the great secondary recruiting from Luke Fickell and this defense, and the stars are Paul Chryst guys. I just think it's great. I just don't think it ever gets talked about. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And look, I mean, yeah, it's 2 years since he's been here, right? So he should have guys like that. But you're right. I mean, and you talked about the best 2 players on the team. Those are guys right there. I mean, obviously, you look at Pauling. Well, Pauling's not really a Chryst. He's not a Chryst guy. So, I mean, you look at that. It's a good point. It's a really good storyline because there is still a lot of talent there. Paul Chryst had some talent, not the greatest talent, wasn't necessarily the best using the best talent, but he had those guys, and those guys are amazing. What's your biggest underrated storyline here?
So for me, we talk a lot about you mentioned the argument for DBs to be the top position group. Understandable. And we're both talking about them in the top 3. There's a glaring issue that I see that I'm going to be looking for very early on, and it's tackling. Let's not forget that this group had a lot of missed tackles. Last year, you got Latu and Hallman both having a missed tackle rate of over 25%. That's not going to work. Okay. Rico Hallman, for as much as we love him, and he is great. Yeah, those 7 picks, pretty awesome. Tackling was not his strong suit. So I feel like, we talk about how we're going to have an improved defense. Linebackers certainly doing that. Defensive line still a question mark. The secondary is good. Coverage, no doubt, right? They can even get in the backfield, be disruptive. But are we really going to be a better tackling team? It's the first thing I'm going to want to talk about when I talk about these DBs, and it's a storyline that I'm going to be watching all year, because that has to be better if this defense is going to be what we think it's going to be. And if we have these kinds of missed tackle numbers again, we're going to give up a lot of points in bad situations, and we're not going to be able to beat those teams on our schedule that we think we're going to be able to beat. Like that Nebraska game gets a lot tougher if we're having tackling issues. That Rutgers game against Kabanungai and Shiano, even though I know like that should be a win for us, that's things like that are not going to be easy if we're struggling tackling. That's one of my big storylines, because it's not really talked about. We had a lot of issues with that last year.
That is a great one. And Kamoi Latu, listen, Rico, you can live with it a little bit because he gives you so much in other areas. Kamoi Latu was a disaster. You can't. Here's the difference. You can't have a safety that doesn't tackle. That's the difference. Like, you can live with it on a corner because they're just more limited in their tackling reps. When the safety's coming up in the box and he's that one on block guy and the running back makes a miss, or the guy on the crosser makes a miss, it's a 50-yard play. It's a 60-yard play. It's a backbreaker. Yeah, it's a great point.
And for comparison, Hunter Wohler's missed tackle rate, 7%. 7% versus 25% for Kamoi Latu. That's not going to get it done. And then believe me, there's other numbers on here that'll, like, Matry obviously is not there anymore, but Jung Meta had a high one. Forkrin had kind of a high one. So you're right with the quarterbacks, but Latu has got to be there. Really, really got to be there. Now, the good news, Preston Zachman, only a 9% missed tackle rate. So that's something, and I like Zachman a lot. I think he's going to be critical to the success this year, but it's something that we have to be careful about, because if we miss, how many times did we talk about that last year? Latu was just like, he was like 2 feet away from guys.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's going on?
I think he goes for the kill shot a little much, right? Like it's kind of his MO because of that. You sometimes overrun plays, you sometimes miss plays, you lower your head. I do think that's where Austin Brown coming in and taking some of those reps, which I think he will do, is going to hopefully solidify the back end of the defense. I like what he brings. Let's take a quick break here. We're going to come back. We have a bunch more questions coming up. Who is the overall MVP of this group, the most NFL-ready prospect? Who has the highest upside? Who are you most excited to see among the newcomers? A bunch still to get to on Locked On Badgers here. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. FanDuel remains the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and information. This is the place you go to for futures, teasers, parlay, spreads. Rajeev, we talked about the over-under in this Wisconsin team a lot. We both are on the over. What would be the number that would make you go on the under?
Oh, I think if it's like 9.5, I certainly would go on the under. 8.5, I'm thinking about it a lot. 9, I would probably, it's because I've been squarely consistent. I'm between 8 and 9. I don't know where I'm going to land, but that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think you and I are very similar in that. I'm 8 to 9. I think 9 would be an incredible season. And you can do that over at FanDuel. Bet that over, because I'm telling you, they're going to get 7, 8 wins. I think 7 is the floor. I think they're going to get to 8. Go bet that futures over at FanDuel, FanDuel.com. It is the best place and #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. Again, please do it responsibly, but wonderful place to spice up your sports weekend, sports evenings, make it a little more exciting over at FanDuel.com.
Did you just say floor 7? Do you think the floor is 7? I think the floor is still 6.
I think they could get to 6 if TVD is not the guy, and that's a very real possibility. Like, that really is a possibility. I didn't have you on for the quarterback show, but like, it's very real, not to turn this into a downer. Like, he might not be the guy, and we're right back to not having a passing offense.
But at least we know what we have in his backup, and we know that we have a guy who can be serviceable, and I think we can get some wins. Yeah, for sure.
It's true. Let's talk some questions here. You ready? Who's the MVP of this group? Throw the cornerbacks and the safeties together. Who is the MVP?
I mean, it's Hunter Wohler, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
to
not
me,
close.
it's not
I
even
tried,
close. I mean,
I tried to spice it up with Rico, but it's Wohler, 100%.
he's a tackling machine. He's absolutely amazing. I just said he had a 7% missed tackle rate. The guy is incredible. I mean, yeah, I feel like we're going to look back at his time at Wisconsin and realize he was one of the better safeties that we've had. And his impact last year, I mean, our defense struggled at times, a lot of times, but there were also times where they turned it up and they just all of a sudden stopped allowing points and they stopped the bleeding and they really turned it on. And that was all led by Hunter Wohler. And yes, Hallman's a great cover corner. Definitely going to need turnovers again from him, but Hunter's the guy, 100%.
Yeah, and can we mention the fact that like when I talked to Brady Collins, Hunter Wohler is now up to about 218. He's put on like 15 pounds of muscle. According to Brady Collins, faster as well. So bigger, stronger, faster. Like, look at what he did last year, and now add 15 pounds of muscle to that. I mean, it's. I'll say this too. I'll say this. I think he's going to be better because the pieces around him are going to be better as well. Now, if you don't constantly have to run into running backs that get through the linebackers, now you can flow a little bit more. You can be more disruptive. I think he's going to generate more turnovers. I think you're going to see an even better version of what we saw last year. And what we saw last year was one of the best safeties in the Big Ten. He was incredible. Now he's bigger. He's faster. He's more help around him. I think he's a stud.
Yeah, you had mentioned one time on this show or our show about like how his numbers might go down as far as tackles go because the players around him are going to be better. That doesn't mean he's going to have any worse of a year. He might not have that ridiculous tackle number that he had last year, but that's okay. And the pieces around him means that he is going to be more disruptive. And it's not the number of tackles, it's what tackles he gets. And you're going to see, I think, more tackles for loss. You're going to see more sacks. Hopefully you're going to see more just overall disruption. And his level goes up. That defense level goes way up.
Who's the best NFL guy in this room? Like who's the best NFL prospect in this room? Not necessarily the highest ceiling because those are different. Who's the best NFL prospect?
This is a tough one for me. So, okay, are we looking at just guys right now? Because I would say Xavier Lucas only because he's got some massive upside, but I think Hunter Wohler is still that guy. And I think I would also make the argument for a guy like Preston Zachman because I feel like once he continues to develop, I think he is going to be kind of the guy that's sort of like we look back at this year and say, wow, what a jump that Zachman took. That's just my prediction. And because of that, I would put Zachman in that discussion as well. But it's honestly, you could look at Hallman, you could look at Wohler, you could look at Zachman. I'm going to go Wohler just because I think he's got a ready-made NFL body, especially with the gains that you're just talking about. He has that prototypical sort of, Wisconsin safety. We've sent a couple of these guys into the NFL. He's going to be the next one that we do.
That's interesting on Zachman. I feel like Zachman, and I could be wrong on this, I feel like he's kind of Caputo-ish, like kind of Jason Doring-ish, like a bit of a overstuffed safety, undersized linebacker type. He's not a linebacker. He runs well enough to be safety. Don't get me wrong. Yep. I wonder if he has the physical skill set to play in the NFL. I'm just not sure on that. But I think he's a great guy to have in the 2 deep. He's assignment sound. He tackles well. I think it's Rico. And partially because the NFL values cornerbacks potentially more than any position outside quarterback, left tackle, defensive end. Right? Like it's such a hard position to find. I think Rico is so refined. I think he's a little better athlete than he gives credit for. Great ball skills, good in zone, great awareness, can cover in man. I thought the best reps he had was when he was guarding Marvin Harrison Jr. And that was really when Ohio State decided to go away from. Listen, he can't shut down Marvin Harrison Jr., but you can see they shifted away a little bit when Rico was on him. Like he competed better than just about anybody I've seen against that player. I think he's the top NFL guy in the room because he's a corner. Hunter is still, as a safety, I still wonder a little bit with the coverage skills in the NFL when he's going to be asked to cover 4, 3, 5 guys in space.
So I hear you on Rico, and I think you're right. I mean, in the sense that he's got that cornerback. That's a huge skill set in the sense that the NFL loves cornerbacks right now, no doubt about it. I think if he has a year like he did last year, and I'm not saying he has to have 7 interceptions, but if he has a year as successful as last year, then I would agree with you. I'm not worried that he's going to have a down year, but I just feel like he was on such a high last year after he took a big jump. Because the year before that, it was like, well, who is this guy really going to be? Last year was his coming out party. Is he going to have a little sort of bit of a slump? Are his numbers going to drop a little bit? Is that going to hurt his confidence? I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but with cornerbacks, sometimes I just worry, like, is he really ready to take even another step this year to really solidify himself as a top cornerback in the Big Ten, in the country potentially? Or is he just a good cornerback, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but when you look at a guy like Alexander Smith and you looked at how excited we were about him, sometimes it just doesn't work when there's a little more hype around a cornerback. Again, not saying that's going to happen. Love Rico, but I just feel like that's something I'm kind of looking out for. I hope that that's not the case, but sometimes you can have these little dips.
Man, I was super high on Alexander Smith.
We both were.
Yep. What the heck? Talk about honestly just the guy that was a poor fit for the system and what they were trying to run. I kind of feel like he probably had some stuff going on in the offseason as well, not to rehash all that. Yeah, the thing with Rico is I do think the numbers will drop because I 7 interceptions just isn't
You're right.
But I think the film will be the same. And I tend to think the film checks out with Rico. But we'll see. Hunter, I think both are going to play in the NFL. Both are going to get drafted, Hunter and Rico. So it's interesting to have 2 defensive backs kind of lead the way for the Badgers heading into a season. I don't know when that has happened. Ready for this one? Highest ceiling. To me, this is Xavier Lucas. If he hits, he's a first, second round type cornerback. There's just not people like him. Talking to Brady Collins again, I talked to Brady Collins and I said, who are a couple of guys that have really stood out? And I didn't feed it to him. I didn't say, hey, how's Xavier Lucas looked? How has Emerson Mandel looked? I said, who are a couple of the new guys that have stood out? He said, Mandel, Lucas.
Wow. Love to hear that.
I think it's that guy.
Lucas is that guy. Lucas is the guy, and I know we're going to talk about freshmen a little bit more here too. I think Lucas is a guy that can have an instant impact. You never know. I mean, he could come in here and compete this year. No doubt about it. You know, there's nothing that says he can't do that. He has physical tools that are just different. You said it. He does things differently. He is different than those other guys. Absolutely the highest ceiling, and it's not even close. I think that's an obvious one for me.
Yep, same here. Who would be next on your list? Like, if we both are so obvious on Xavier Lucas, we're probably not adding much value to the community because I'm sure the community is as well. Who would be next on your list if I ask you who, besides him, if they hit their ultimate ceiling, who's the best player in this group?
So I mentioned him earlier. I think Amari Snowden, because of his physical traits, I feel like that's a ceiling. Now, I don't know if he's ever going to materialize, but I do feel like as far as physical traits that we haven't really seen materialize on the field yet, Amari Snowden is up there. But I think Austin Brown is another guy who's got really high ceiling, can take another jump this year. But I'm going to have to go with Snowden on that just because the upside is just there physically.
That's fair. What if I just said it's Hunter Wohler? Because even if let me ask you this, even if Austin Brown hits his ceiling, and I love Austin Brown. I think he's a big physical guy. He showed in the Ohio State game he could be in the open space and make tackles against elite athletes. Is he ever going to be a 120 tackle guy like Hunter Wohler was last year? I think Hunter Wohler is probably the answer to, if it's not Xavier Lucas, it's Hunter Wohler, because we're already seeing a pretty close version of what he is as a finished product, and it's really damn good. Yeah, now it's really even bigger and stronger. I think it's him.
Yeah. But then, you go back to like what you just mentioned about how you're not sure about his coverage skills, right? And so when you think about that from a ceiling perspective, you have to weigh that out. But I agree with you. I mean, look, I'm never going to say a bad thing about Hunter Wohler. He's our guy. He's our bell cow on the defensive side of the ball. Without him, we are not a good defensive team.
All right, let me hit you with some over-unders. You ready? Over-unders. Do any of the cornerbacks, the freshman cornerbacks, break the red shirt limit this year? And I'm not talking on special teams. Like they cover kicks for 6 games. Do they play more than 4 games, Lucas or Agard?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say under on that. I don't think they will, just because we do have a lot of players. We do have a lot of young players that are going to try to get in there. So there's other players I feel like are going to be that are going to take those spots. And I would love to see Xavier Lucas get some of that. But I just feel like this year he's going to be learning a lot. He's going to be doing a lot of scout team stuff, and we'll see him more. We'll see him some, but we're not going to see. I don't think we're going to break that red shirt limit.
I think I'm going to take the over on Lucas because I think he's going to be good enough. And this is me putting on my optimistic hat. I don't think he's going to be here 4 years, right? So I think they're going to get him in, start working him into games and get him into 5, 6, 7 games, because I think they're going to know they need him next year, right? This is probably Rico's last year. They're going to lose other pieces, Delancey. I think they want him ready for next year. And I think because of that, they're going to start working him in, because if he's as good as we think he could be, as good as Brady Collins thinks he could be, as good as others think he could be, he's not going to be here for 4 years anyway. So get him ready for next season. That would be my take on him.
That is a really good take because, Forkerin, Delancey, Hallman, they're likely, all gone at the end of this year. That's 3 out of your 4. So then you got DeCluna. Then you're looking at like Jay Sarnell, Amari Snowden. You're looking at Xavier Lucas. You're right. That's a really good point. It's something that I had not really thought of. I hadn't really looked at the fact that next year, it's about next year more than this year. Listen, I'm all for it. I'm all for him playing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games. Let's do it. I mean, if he's that good, and if he can go out and be disruptive and can make those plays and cover these, we're going to see a lot of great receivers this year in the conference. And if he can help that out, I'm all for it.
I mean, yeah, we're all for, on both of our podcasts, we're all for 6'1" cornerbacks that run a 4.4. Like,
let's go.
Let's go. And by the way, that's one of the positions you can step into. If you're physically ready, you can step in at cornerback, receiver, running back as a freshman. It's harder at some other spots, but if you can just turn and run, like obviously there's more technique everywhere. You can always get better with hand placement, foot placement, reading. But that's one of the spots, if you're just a good enough athlete, you can step in and play right away. We see it everywhere in college football. Over under Rico, 4.5 picks. Obviously had the 7 last year.
Yeah, I'm gonna go over on this. I think 5 is a number that I would have, and I feel like he is, you would think a lot of people are going to probably take the under on this just because, 7 maybe drops down to 4, but he's that good. And he was still targeted a lot last year, even when people knew who he was. And, he's going to be guarding great receivers who are going to get targeted. There are a lot of great receivers in this league. There are a lot of good quarterbacks, but not as many good quarterbacks as there are receivers. And so I feel like he is still going to be disruptive, and I would say over.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that the tipping point to me is I don't think the Big Ten quarterbacks are very good. Like, I just don't think it's a very proven, deep, experienced lot of signal callers. There's some young upside. They have to prove it. Young upside is going to make young mistakes. I think they're going to, and he's a ball hawk. Like, he is legitimately a ball hawk. He's going to pick off a couple. He's good in zone coverage. He's going to match up against receivers that quarterbacks are going to want to throw to because he's going to be playing the alpha on the other side. I think it is like 5. It's not going to be 7. I think I said a good number on this, though, because I was like, he's going to get 4 or 5. I think it's going to be 5, though. I'm right there with you. Over under Austin Brown, 50 tackles this year. Had 37 last year. I think we both expect a bigger role this year.
Over for me. Really like Austin Brown. Really feel like he's going to have an impact. He's going to play a lot in this kind of 5 defensive back type system. I think he's going to
Nope, we just lost Rajeev. Rajeev went over. I am also going to go over on this one. I'm going to go over on Austin Brown. And I can't believe we lost Rajeev right before the biggest point of the show, which is we're going to be great in this position. Oh, there you are. We got you back. I don't know if that was me or you. It's probably me. I'm in a basement, for gosh sake.
It was totally me. I can see my little Wi-Fi signal there. It's totally my fault.
Love it.
But where were we? I was saying over. Yeah, I'm taking over on Austin Brown's tackles. Is that where we left off?
Yep, that's where, and that's what I'm taking as well. I'm taking the over. I think he's going to step into a big role. Big time athlete, really physical player. I think the pairing with him and Wohler is going to be awesome. That's going to be a lot of fun. Oh, let me ask you this quick. This was on a previous show, and I'm shotgunning you with this, so don't feel bad if you can't think of something right away. Can you think of a better 1-2 pairing than Rico and Hunter Wohler in a Badger secondary in the last 10, 15 years? So some names I thought of, you had so you can go back to so Jordan Shelton, but think of a pairing that's better. So you had Nick Nelson and Derek Tyndall. You had it's hard though. That's partially to the lack of talent we've had in that position at times.
I mean, honestly, I would say no, just because this kind of we've had a lot of good safeties over the years, but cornerbacks with this much kind of hype after 1 year. I mean, coming off a year with 7 picks, being the clear favorite to be clear overall number 1 on that line, and an all Big Ten kind of a guy, potentially even all American kind of a guy. Yeah, I would say when you have that kind of talent at quarterback and that kind of talent at safety, I mean, you might be going back to the Jamar Fletcher days and looking at some of our top quarterbacks that we've ever had.
And that's what I had to do. I literally went back to Jamar Fletcher to find that kind of is similar to this. And Jamar Fletcher was an absolute monster, All-American, first-round pick.
Who was our top cornerback in some of Jimmy Leonard's top years? I'm trying to think of who would have been his best cornerback that he played with, because that I think is where you can. Because there was a time where we had a very good defense, And I feel like if we had a shutdown corner, and I just can't think of who that might be, that might be sort of the time that you can look at and say, okay, if there was a decent shutdown corner that played with Jimmy, because Jimmy was a fantastic safety. I mean, no one's going to argue that. One of the best we've ever had. That's probably where I would say you're going to have to go back to look at a guy that could, a combo that can compete with Wohler and
Scott Starks would have been the corner.
There you go.
So
I mean, that's worthy of discussion. That's right, Scott Starks, because that was the Purdue game, and where
that combo is better. Fumble. Leonard and Starks is better.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's got to be the one, because Starks was fantastic. I mean, I remember Starks his freshman year. I think it was freshman or sophomore year. Man, he got just burned by Michigan State, and he came back with such a vengeance, and I was like so happy for him because he took such a big leap. I think it was for his junior year. And I'm like, wow, that is the kind of leap you wish you could see from a lot of guys. And it was awesome to see. We had a top defense, Jimmy back there. Yeah. I mean, that was a weird top 5 defense, top 3 defense, really, when those guys were playing.
Yeah, there was some talents all across the board on those defenses. Yeah, I think that group is better. That's a great call by you. That pairing's better because Jim Leonard is an All-American, multiple All-American. Like,
amazing.
As much as we love Hunter Wohler, Jim Leonard he's in a safety class in the Big Ten by him, like in very elite company there. So
I mean, the NFL too. I mean, he played for years.
Yeah, he's an absolute baller. All right, that's a great call. But it also, even then, like, it shows you how good this pairing potentially is that you have to go back, 15 years, right? You have to go back and say, yeah, remember when Jim Leonard was playing? And there'd be young Badger fans like, no, I don't remember that. You know, like,
because it's having both is the rare part. We've always got one good quarterback or a great safety, but having both at the same time is definitely, a kind of a unicorn.
Give me your grade for just this season for the defensive backs as a whole. We're going to combine the cornerbacks and safeties in this.
Combining. Okay. Combining this year, I'm going to grade the room a B+. Happy with the room overall, but again, I brought up the tackling, and I'm sort of that's in my head now because I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, okay, that I need to see that a little more, and little bit of depth issues at cornerback. You can talk about safety. You're probably looking at, if I was doing safety alone, I'd probably say an A, probably say like a B for cornerback. So I'm going to go B+.
I'm going B. I just sometimes I think and this is okay because we're fans, right? Like our shows are geared around being fans, talking about something we love and we're passionate about. And we're both relatively optimistic guys. But I still think it's like a B because when you start looking at what the elite teams have, the elite teams aren't going into like a Big Ten. The Ohio State's just got Caleb Downs, right? And they have 4 5-star cornerbacks on their roster. Or 3, I think. They're not going into a season hoping Nizer Forkran takes a big step. And if he falls off, DeCluna and Max Lofi, you know what I mean? Like when you look at where we're trying to get and you grade our secondary kind of based on that, I think it's a really solid group. And if some of the pieces come along, maybe it's a B+ by the end of the year. But Austin Brown is still a bit of a question mark. Our number 3 safety, we just talked about, misses tackles a quarter of the time he has an opportunity. That's, I think it's a B, which is good.
It's a good shout. I think that, and I think that because we're obviously top heavy, right? When we're talking about, we just talked about one of the best combos that we've ever had. That has to drag it up a little bit for me because, but you're right. I mean, there are question marks still, which again is why, going back to our earlier discussion about where does this unit rank, that's why, it's hard to kind of put that group up at 1 when you're saying a B, right? Like that's difficult because there are question marks still. As good as we're as happy as we are with the room, there's still question marks that have to be answered. Yeah,
100%. Give me your grade going forward. So that would include all the kids in the 24 class and even the kids that we've gotten so far in the 25 class. Emrich, Grandine, Jamar Washington, Scott. Give me your grade going forward. Look it out for the next 2 or 3 years.
I mean, it's hard to not just be optimistic about these guys like Xavier Lucas and Agard. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go A- because I just feel like it's a step up from where I feel like we are now. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're still right. These guys aren't like the top cornerbacks in the country. So is that really an A? Where does that put you? I'm gonna say A-. Definitely an uptick. You have to see this room getting better. At least I see this room getting better over time, and not just in the future, not just necessarily with the guys that we're looking at, but even in general. Like that this position in this whole group is kind of going in an upward trajectory because that's what Fickle wants. And the recruiting has been solid in this area. And that's really the driver of it going up.
Yeah. Not to surprise anybody. I'm always just a tick below you on these. I'm going to go B+. So I hear you. Like, I love the upside they've added. I'm hoping they can still add a boundary quarterback in this class. They need to continue to add athletes. They need to stack it, right? You can't get Xavier Lucas and Emilio Agard one class and then strike out the next class on those boundary cornerbacks. Going forward, we're going to have to replace our 2 best players. Do we know there's an in-house replacement? We're hoping on the upside guys. The one spot that you hit on that I completely agree with. This staff knows how to add talent at this position. I think we've seen it. They emphasized it. They understand what they're looking for. And I love the athletes they're adding. Even the guys like, listen, Luke Emmerich is a 6'1" guy who runs a 4.4, like 4.45. Like, he's 200 pounds. He's a great athlete. Grant Dean's a really good athlete. Jamar Washington. I love Washington's film. Like, everybody they're adding feels like a potential impact guy. So I like the direction. I like what the staff is doing here. I'm going to go B+ just because you're going to have to replace some studs. And I'm not sure if you look on the roster and you can point to anybody and say, I know for a fact that guy's going to be a stud, right? It's hard to say that. So, such
a difference from the previous staff. Like, when we were worried about this position so much, and now we're like, yeah, look at all these guys, look at all these athletes we're getting at cornerback and safety. I mean, that's exciting. And I like the Tressel system. It's obviously very focused on this position. And you're right. I mean, he is recruiting to what is necessary for them to be successful. And it looks like they're doing just that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm very optimistic about this group going forward. I do hope they can finish off either flipping Gentry or maybe there's another guy out there, because you got to keep adding those long boundary cornerbacks that run. And I don't think they have that in this class yet. That's important to continue doing. But I'm right there with you. I like the position. I'm excited about it. Rajeev, I have your Twitter on here. I know people who watch the show know you, but definitely, where can people continue to find you and follow what you got going on?
Yeah, Rajeev Badgers on Twitter, the Bucky Report, of course, wherever you get your podcast, YouTube, all that stuff. Hoping to have Ryan on maybe this weekend. We got to get him back on our show. And yeah, I mean, look, I'm just ready for this season. We're doing a lot of season preview stuff too. We're going to be coming on here now that the off season is kind of coming to an end. Thank goodness. We're going to be back. I'm certainly excited to come back on Locked On more. Obviously, the reaction shows, all that stuff. The season is close, man. We're 44 something like that days away. Like,
it's getting there.
Cannot wait. Just cannot wait.
I told you, I had a guy ask, like, he basically said, almost said, did you and Rajeev had like a falling out? Why is he not on the show anymore? I'm like, I'm working on it. I'll get him. I promise.
I would love to be on it. I would love to be on here more often, but yeah, it's tough. Well, and in the off season, it's tough, right? Because we've all got our lives. This guy just moved, and yeah, there's a lot going on, but the season is where that comes right back.
Let's go. He is Rajeev. I'm Ryan. Thank you so much for tuning in. When you're done here, go check out another Locked On show. Go over to Locked On Packers, Bucks, Brewers. Get the latest on those teams as well. On Wisconsin, and we will talk tomorrow.